Almost every major bit of news about technology that we've heard in the last 6 months has had something to do with his company, mostly indirectly, since everyone is so concerned about how they're going to compete with him. But meanwhile, you know, it's interesting that Google is not perfect. So the first question that I want to ask you is, what is Google's next great revenue stream?
How about text ads? I mean, text ads is not a solved problem, and if you look at accuracy and you look at quality and you look at the kind of tools, I think there's a lot of room for text ads, which is of course the majority of our revenue stream. So I think one of the mistakes...
You mean AdSense type
Yeah,
ads?
and there's lots of stuff. One of the mistakes executives make, I think, is that they get bored with the core business and they sort of lose interest in the real value that's being created in a firm, and so we work very hard on the core business. I think the question you're asking is, aside from our core business, what's the next one? It's almost...
Well, that's what I mean, yeah.
It's almost certainly display. And display meaning non-text ads that are sold for branding and other kinds of things. There's a lot of innovation there.
Sold through, do you expect that would happen through the existing distribution mechanisms like AdSense that you've already got, or are you thinking of maybe creating some whole new kind of business, or buying an ad network like some of the ones that were on stage this morning? We had Microsoft and
we're not buying
AOL.
Microsoft.
No, I didn't mean buying. No, but buying something like what Aquantive had, or what AOL has, etc.
Well, of course, we bought DoubleClick.
Very similar.
I think the opportunity for display is pretty large because people are shifting their what we would think of as offline display budgets to online. They really want the measurability, and so if we can come up with products that are more measurable, I think we can build a very large business there, and it would be sold through all of the channels. So you do through partners, online as well as direct. The reason I say I think it's the next logical one is our sales force in many cases have experience in previous companies selling it. Customers who buy text ads also are busy buying display ads from other sources. There, as you pointed out, there's this very interesting phenomena of ad networks that's emerged, which I think provides a lot of value. So it's a big space.
But I guess what I'm also driving at is the biggest knock against Google is that you are a one-product company. I'm just curious, how do you respond to that?
Well, our goal is to be a one-product company.
Explain.
What
the heck does that mean?
It's called Google. And in fact, the whole thesis of the company is features, not products. Again, as companies get larger, it seems to me that the products begin to look like the org chart rather than the org chart looking like the products. So our idea is one seamless experience where you're using Google and it just sort of all is integrated in a way that really makes sense. And so you have a single brand and a single way. I think usually when people talk about, they're really talking about our reliance on text ads. And that's why we have this focus on display.
Well, they're talking about your reliance on search ads, basically, which is the lion's share of your profit.
Right. But if you're going to pick a lion, that's the lion you want to have.
There's no question. That has been proven.
And just so it's clear, while it's absolutely true that a vast majority of our revenue comes from text ads themselves are quite interesting, right? There's no single large category of text ads. There's no single large country except for the US. There's no particular reliance on a particular sector. If you're going to pick a business to be reliant on, you would pick something that's pretty well differentiated.
So you think of it in terms of text ads, not search ads. I don't really know any other company or person that I've heard talk about text ads as a category the way you just had.
The reason I use the word text ads is that we serve text ads against content which is not searchable, which is our AdSense for Content product, which is a multi-billion-dollar business. So we have the ability to actually throw ads against content that is not involved in search at all, which is through our AI technique.
Because you've had an agreement to search those sites through your other technologies.
Which people like to do.
Right, and I mentioned earlier in a question I asked the ad people, this thing of AdSense being used to distribute content, that's a very interesting sort of new thing that you've done that I don't think has gotten enough attention. Well, is that important, a pretty important development from your point of view, where they're sending video around and putting ads, pre or post-roll ads?
One of the problems or ideas or opportunities is that the distinction between advertising and information gets blurred. we're trying to take the position that advertising has value, that that high quality advertising is informative, it needs to be labeled as such and so forth, which we work very hard to do. There are people who are engaged in things which we don't like, where they basically are putting which they claim to be information, which are really infomercials. So we try to keep that distinction together. But having said that, there are many, many new forms of advertising that are coming out. Maybe the most interesting are click-to-play ads, where basically you would choose to watch the commercial, which I know is sort of a bizarre concept, I think, for all of us. But it's so interesting that you would click on it. And in fact, the testing and the measurements indicate people are doing it because they enjoy it. And again, it's a whole new category of ads, which Google obviously is happy to be distributing.
Shifting to a different subject, Google itself. What you've got there is kind of a culture of super individualists, where you've really always sort of selected for the genius programmer, and you've got an enormous number of them. Meanwhile, you have Wall Street kind of asking you to become a more predictable, mature company. Is there a kind of conflict between those two facts?
Yes, we have resolved it.
How have you resolved it?
That's why we have dual class shareholders. I mean, basically, you cannot run a company where you sort of listen to the way Wall Street says you have to run the company. You have to run the company based on the principles that you set out. When Google went public, as everybody knows, our founders wrote a letter which said, these are our principles, and we've stuck to those. And I disagree a little bit that it's a genius, sort of individual programmer. We select for people who share the values, are obviously as smart as we can find and capable. We don't value experience very much, which occasionally gets us into trouble, which I'll come back to. And we also, in fact, select for people who want to work with other people, because it is collaborative. There are very, very few things at Google that are done by just one person.
Well, actually, on stage earlier today, you were quoted as having said that you understand how much one person can do, and you think 2 or 3 people can do a lot, but when it gets to be a large group, you don't know how to manage that. You were quoted in Business Week supposedly that way.
If you look at the history of software development, all of the very interesting things that have built the industry that everybody here represents, and my entire career, have been built by 2 people. And the reason, at least at the time, was that 2 people get on the phone. And they could fit into a small conference room, in their dorm room or what have you. I think there are essentially no counterexamples. Now, of course, the moment they get going, people go to them. But if you go back to, Windows, Unix, C, all of the sort of underlying here. So you could argue, for example, that maybe 3 is the right model because it's more collaborative, but it's certainly not 30. And there are essentially no examples of revolutionary products which were begun with a 30-person team. And it's just the nature of software and software technology. And by the way, it's also true in other areas of research.
But you just said that working with others is such a key trait that you select for. But I mean, isn't working in larger and larger teams going to be required for such a gigantic company as you are becoming?
This is, I think, an unsolved problem in the industry. Let's just talk about the predictable outcome, right? You start off with a very smart group, and you're in a startup, and your friends and so forth. You come out of college. And eventually you bring in traditional management, and then you have big projects, and you have normal projects, and you have product plans and so forth. You announce your plans, you have your roadmap, so forth and so on. And you follow a traditional S-curve, and the S-curves all look like this. And the reason the S-curve's like this is that by the end of this, you're completely predictable and you've eliminated all innovation. Okay? On the other hand, it's useful to have some predictability so you can figure out what you're doing tomorrow. So what is the balance? We came to a balance which is known as the 20% time, where employees are encouraged to spend 20% on the projects of their liking. And what happens is that the 20% gets aggregated and then eventually is turned into new projects. So this is a pretty good way of driving creativity, and it helps us recruit top technical people. But it has another interesting effect, which means that you're the manager, and we're putting a lot of pressure on you because your product's late or screwed up or what have you, and you come into me and I'm the programmer, and you say, look, you've got to do this, this is a huge thing, and I can look you straight in the eye and say, I will give you everything I've got for 80% of my time.
That is actually encouraged to say it just that way.
It is encouraged.
No matter how screwed up your business is at that moment.
Absolutely. And by the way, people say it to me. And it's our culture.
And you say, wait, I got 20% over here to screw around, no matter how screwed up the stock price is this week or whatever?
Well, again, we're not focused on the stock.
Well, I know, that was a bad example. Anyway, go ahead.
Again, we're focused on building a long-term institution and changing the world. And the reason I give you that example is I didn't really understand how it would work, but once it was in place, it serves as a pressure cooker relief valve, on these sort of managers who come in and overmanage. So there's a set of such things, of which this is one, which we believe do allow us to scale and retain the creative people. I don't want to oversell this. I think the biggest problem we have is time zones. Because now we have 50 development centers all around the world. We have not yet figured out a way to eliminate time zones and time changes and so forth, and I don't think we will, even at Google. And the fact of the matter is, you have people working in different groups. How do they talk to each other? It's not really solved. We have the world's largest video conferencing system. It's overloaded. We're building our own internal video system, which nobody can figure out how to get to work right. It's just all of these problems of scale when you have many, many thousands of engineers organized in these little groups.
Well, you're setting up the next question I was going to ask you, which I was going to preface it by saying almost every challenge that Google faces has something to do with scale and how do you deal with the scale that you have achieved and that you're likely to continue achieving. And privacy is the category here. More and more people are really worried that Google, despite however unevil it might want to be, is getting so deep into so many parts of our lives, particularly if you use Gmail and also search, which is a common combination, that I hear more and more people saying, I don't feel safe that Google should have so much information about me. How do you deal with that?
Well, I understand the concern, and I think it's particularly worrisome when you think about governments. Because, and let's speak generally, not specifically about Google, because of the way technology works, all of the technology companies here represented in the room are aggregating a lot of data about people. If you're a dictator, right, nobody here is a dictator because you're not in your country with your dictator behaviors, you would immediately seize all that information because it would be so interesting. In a democracy, there is a debate over the rights of individuals to such information, but there's no question that it is a political debate of how invasive you want technology to be. And the reality from a Google perspective is that countries differ on this question. There are countries, my best example is England, which has, or the UK, which has the largest number of closed-circuit cameras in the world by a factor of 10. So when you're walking on a street in London, you're on camera somewhere. But they also allow you as an individual, if you're defamed in your view by the newspapers, to sue the newspapers. Okay? It's a different structure around privacy, information, boundary between government and so forth. So the reality that Google faces is that there isn't an agreement from society on how we should behave in these things. And we get ourselves into constant problems where we get some prosecutor who's decided to subpoena something, right, which we don't really want to give them. So we fight them in court and so forth and so on. The China one being the most extreme example where we actually don't operate in China fully because we don't want to have that information be available to the Chinese.
So do you deliberately not locate data centers in countries where you're not absolutely confident that the law would allow you to resist pressures like that?
And that is correct. And furthermore, the current operating global legal system says that you can operate a global service, but that the country that's busy trying to torture you over these things, sorry for the term, our argument is that that information is not available in your domain. So this is an important technical distinction. So countries are now, for example, trying to write laws which says that this particular forbidden content can't be available anywhere on the internet, not just in our country. So again, this boundary is of enormous interest for people. So this is, I think, an issue for the internet. For Google, the reality is we have chosen, we stated the problem, and we're now subject to the law. In our case, we have an 18-month search logs rule, which was imposed on us by Europe. Okay. And again, if Europe changes the law, we'll be imposed by they'll change that.
Yeah, one of the real themes of Brainstorm, and it's really emerged greatly throughout these couple days, is that technology and society are deeply interlinked, and we need, as technology people, to be thinking how what we do impacts society. You just said before one of the goals of Google is to change the world. Succinctly, since I want to get to the audience and questions, but I want to hear you address this. What's the top point you would make about the chance that Web 2.0, the social net, where we are in technology, is going to really help us make the changes, address the social challenges we face?
Well, if you believe that societies are better led when the citizens are better informed, then your goal should be, in my view, to get more information to everywhere all the time. And so a simple way of expressing what everybody in the room is trying to do is trying to get people to be better informed. And information here in the broadest possible terms. And information can also come in the form of entertainment and so forth. But certainly the world represented here in the room spends all of its time online. There's always these things going on. That lifestyle, and it's important to remember how new this lifestyle is, right? The notion of cell phones and BlackBerries and iPhones and so forth is relatively new in human society and in our lives. So I think as a goal, I think we need to first recognize that the human mind loves information, loves entertainment. We are, in fact, affecting the way society moves. We need to deal with that respectfully, and then we need to figure out some of the implications of it. The fact of the matter is that if you offer, for example, a social network, you will have illegal activity in it, right? Which obviously we don't want. So then you have to have a strategy to deal with it. You know, the child pornographer sort of problem. And so this is a reality that we all face. Obviously, with technology, we can address some of that. But the burden, I think, on the industry and on the web and so forth is to get people online and get them using it in a powerful way. The promise of cloud computing and web computing is a real change in ease of use and access to information.
Yeah, and empowerment. Yeah.
And you know, it's at least as big an opportunity before all of us as the PC revolution was 15 or 20 years ago. Many of the people that I know who are in the room participated in that in a big time way, and so you can map this. Information is so much larger an industry than the computer industry that both the opportunity and the responsibility is very severe. There are many examples. The revenue one, which is I think the easiest one to understand, is that if you look at people spending, one survey was people spending 25% of their time online, but only monetizing at 8%. So you want to understand where all the revenue is going? There's a revenue time gap, right? People are spending more time on the internet, but people are making less money in advertising. So that's an example of a problem, because advertising is one of the chief sources to produce new information, entertainment.
Interesting. Well, I hope the audience will ask some of the good questions I have not had a chance to ask. So I want people who haven't asked questions before. How about this guy right here?
Hi, Rich Wong from Excel Partners.
Hi, Rich.
Hi, Eric. You've mentioned before, Eric, that mobile was a very important frontier for Google, and I think at sometimes you've been quoted as perhaps the most important frontier. There's a lot of press, of course, about Google, whether it's Android, the Spectrum initiatives, mobile advertising, mobile services. I'd be interested in hearing your perspective on how would you grade those initiatives from a report card perspective of which are going the best or which are most successful, and where are you headed going forward?
Well, our wireless initiative was a perfect outcome. The cost of a letter. And as a result, I think all of us will benefit from having more competition in open networks. I think you all know I'm on the board of Apple, and you look at the success of the iPhone 3G. I was in Palo Alto last night. There's a line of people, outside the Palo Alto store, and I assume this is true. I guess waiting for the next, truck.
Even last night, they're still in Apple. Wow, that's amazing.
Maybe they're just doing it because they like to hang out in line at the Apple store. But
it is an increasingly popular social activity. Yeah.
We'll relay that to our friends at Apple. But it shows you the power of a device that actually is a step forward. The iPhone's competitors all have devices that are of this category, either shipping now or upcoming. It's really simple. A phone is a GPS, it's a camera, it's a computer, and it's a browser. The reason I wanted to emphasize the iPhone is that it's the first one with a really fully functional browser. And in our case, we, for example, show traditional desktop ads, not mobile ads, because we finally have a browser that's powerful enough. That's a huge change from our perspective, from a revenue and our being Google's role. Android, as you know, is not shipping yet. Google have announced that it'll be shipping by the end of the calendar year, and that's still on trial. So the whole idea here is get all these initiatives out there. The math is such that the combination of the powerful platform, the powerful browser, the new 3G networks, LTE, and so forth coming, plus a new category of apps that have not yet been invented, is really a breakthrough. The best example, the winner of our apps project that we did with Android, I'm sure this will be true of all the phones, is you pick up this phone, you pick up the phone, it looks around, it knows where it is, it does image recognition against Street View, and names the buildings that you're seeing and tells you what's going on inside of them.
When's that going to happen? When are we going to have that operational?
Later this year.
Later this year?
Yeah. And so you sit there and go, wow, that's like a really, really interesting product. I'm not sure I want to run that or not. Right.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, in mobile, there's a lot of products that kind of have that wow factor. Because of the use of GPS and in location services, many of my own view is that in social networks and social apps, all of the interesting next generation social apps will be primarily mobile ones because they're all about people and their motion. Where am I going? How do I meet up? How do I find you? What did you buy? What can I buy at the store?
We're going to go for a few more minutes, just so you know. And what's your questions? Go ahead, over here.
Sam Whitmore, Media Survey.
Hi, Sam.
Hi, Eric. Is Google a formal contractor to the U.S. government in any way, shape, or form? Are you contracted, for example, to help enforce the Patriot Act or help with EPA or anything like that?
The specific question on the Patriot Act and anything involving the three-letter acronym groups, CIA, NSA, is absolutely not. We are a supplier of hardware and search services to the federal government through a federal sales group that we have in Washington.
Okay, let's see, over here, let's get something. Is there somebody with a mic already? Okay.
Fred
Freddie.
Vogelstein. Hey, David, how are you?
Hi, Fred.
Eric. It would seem that, at least from a layman's perspective, that the simple solution to every time I see you on stage, I see somebody ask you a question about privacy, and you read a story every other week about people worrying about Google having too much control of data. It would seem like the easiest way to address that would be to just offer people the ability to encrypt their data. But I don't know what the technical challenges are or the repercussions of doing that are. But it seems like allowing people to do that might solve the problem overnight.
So imagine you're in a courtroom with a judge and you try to argue that point, and then imagine what the judge will say to you because he believes that you're trying to evade his lawful order for people's behavior. So the answer, of course, is yes, we can encrypt or simply not take the information in the first place. Google and other such services do need to have a certain amount of information in order to learn from the information. But we don't need to keep it for very long, and we can anonymize the logs. Here's an example of a legal question. If logs are currently at Google and we choose to anonymize them, have we now committed a crime? Given that we're under court orders in various lawsuits over data retention. And so it turns out that part of the reason everybody's so concerned about this is that the law has not necessarily caught up with kind of this simple idea that I certainly agree with that you just named.
Okay, we got time for one more. Okay, make it fast.
Hi, I'm Guillaume Cohen from Veolia. So you've influenced the life of consumers quite a bit, and now there's big change in the enterprise happening, and kind of the borders blurring between the consumer and this technology is hitting the enterprise. I'm curious to know what Google's plans are with regards to embracing that, and if the company is set up in a way that can address the enterprise needs.
The easiest way for us to enter the enterprise is to do the products that are relatively high sort of pain level and relatively broadly described, throughout the company. So email is an example. It's very difficult for Google to offer the kind of high-quality specialized service that, say, an Oracle database would offer, within a corporation. So we prioritized email, messaging, calendar, which of course turns out to be really important, and we did some breakthroughs there. And we offer a service which is $50 a year for enterprises which are hosted. That business has something like 1 million companies using it. These are now typically quite small.
1 million?
Yeah, it's a very large, of course these are small companies, so we're not talking about the huge companies. So it's a bottoms-up strategy. And the large companies are now beginning to use these in conjunction with the tools that they do. So of course, my background is in selling the enterprise. My view is that it will be a many-year process, but that we will, over time, develop very sophisticated tools for broad audiences within corporations, every step up the way, and eventually we'll get to the top.
Sadly, we got to wrap it up.
Thank you very much,
thank you
David.
so
Thank
much,
you all
Eric.
for having me. Okay, take care.
Really glad you were here.
Thank you.